and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the high-level e-conference on gender, business, and taxation in Uganda. The theme for the e-conference this morning will be stimulating economic growth through gender-sensitive tax policy. And today I will be your host. I am Rita Kanyam. Now, when it comes to business within Uganda, statistics that I will be reading to you show that women do hold a number of them in the environment. 57% of proprietors in trade activities are women. 78% of hotels, restaurants, and eating places are owned by women. Women-led businesses make up 24% of the small and medium enterprises, while 85.6% of these women-led businesses are in the informal sector. And yet there are some dire challenges, with less record keeping, less access to finance have been disrupted majorly by the COVID-19 pandemic. In today's discussion, we shall ask, are there policy designs in the tax space that enhance the participation of women in the economy? Can those policies address the inequalities and iniquities that are historically here and have carried in the gender divide? We are coming to you live from the Katonga Hall at the Serena Conference Center, and the hashtag today will be Gender and Tax UG. So wherever you are most welcome once again. Now, I will not be the one having the discussion alone, but I will be joined by our panelists who are here with us, and we have one who will be joining us online. Good morning and welcome. I will start by introducing Miss Caroline Adriasen. She is on my very far left. She is the head of cooperation at the European Union delegation to Uganda. You're most welcome. Now, next to her, we do have Mr. Stephen Asimwe, who is the Director of Policy and Business Development. He is representing the Private Sector Foundation, Uganda. You're most welcome.
Thank you.
Next to him, we have Dr. Maxime Huinato, who is the country representative, UN Women. You're most welcome. And next to him, we have Miss Milina Luoga Isingoma. She is the Assistant Commissioner Research, Planning and Development from the Uganda Revenue Authority. You're most welcome. Last but not least, we have Mr. Julius Mukunda, who is Executive Director, Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group, CSBAG. You're most welcome. Now, getting us right into it, I will be inviting Dr. Maxine Minato, the country representative from the UN Women, who will speak to us about the effectiveness of taxation in promoting equality, because we don't usually hear, or very few people you have heard of women, taxation, and men. Quite something interesting for a number of them. So do take it away, Dr. Maxine.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well. I'm speaking on behalf of UN Women, yes, but the UN in general, to look into how relevant the question of gender is for revenue and taxation in general. We know that in several countries, the question of revenue is a critical question because it's at the basis of all development efforts. And tax policy and revenue policies have been shaping how the economy grows in Africa and beyond. In the specific case of Uganda, we all remember that gender equality has been central to the main orientation of this country in terms of where we want to go and how we want to ensure that more than half of the population is interested in wealth creation and revenue generation in the country. While in so doing, we have made a lot of progress in terms of social access to social services, we have not made a lot of reflection in terms of the participation of women in growth and refining tax policy to take into account the specific nature of women business. So little has been done in terms of tax reform to incorporate gender issue. So action and urgent action is needed for my colleagues in revenue, but also for civil society tasked with monitoring progress in tax reform. You have already started looking at some data that characterize women in the Ugandan economy. I want to first say that in terms of formal poverty, women are more subjectively poor than men. At the moment, the percentage is 71.6% for women and 64% for men in terms of poverty. We also need, as you highlighted very rightly, to know in what sector women are more active and in what sector men are more active. Because when you want to target tax in terms of gender, you need to know who is where. As you have said, we have seen more women in some activities like trade, manufacture, hotel, restaurant, etc., while men have been more in fishery, forestry, 88%, transport and storage, 98%, mining, etc., 65%, which gives us valuable information when you want to do some perequation or some affirmative action in taxation, that you know where to target. So we have unfortunately seen in a lot of African countries, and including in Uganda, a policy that's been increasing revenue from indirect tax, such as VAT. And I'm coming back to that. And also providing tax incentive to large corporations. I've seen it in more than 15 countries in Africa, and Uganda is not an exception. So what is the issue that we have with such a policy? One is that indirect taxes will penalize women that are most of the time the people that you see in supermarkets buying this and that, etc., because that tax is indiscriminate. Anybody that purchases anything is subject to that. Now, the other thing is when you provide tax incentive to large corporations, it might serve some purpose, but what it also does is to deprive government from revenues that will otherwise be serving for social services. So you tax indirectly women, and you reduce tax for big corporations, and government is lacking resources to do social services. So these are things that we need to zoom in to say, yes, if we need to do this, what is the net advantage of the policy, and ensure that we... my next concern will be to look at what are the critical challenges faced by women in terms of revenue policy and taxation policy in the country. And I will not elaborate for the benefit of time, but I will just list them. The first one is the lengthy registration and licensing formalities, knowing the specificities of informal businesses that need to move into formal sector. You have seen that women have been failing to meet the requirements for the tax revenue. And I have the colleagues from the Revenue Authority here. We might want to hear from them how far we've reached in that level. The second is the lack of gender disaggregated data to support research and policy. Because if we say that women are in some sectors that need targeting, women are in some conditions that need targeting, then we need data in order to, and we know that data can come from different sources, including administrative data, including citizen-generated data that will inform the Revenue Authority in terms of how far women are faring. This next one is limited assessment of the effect and impact of tax on women. We, one, need to know where they are, but we also, two, need to have information in terms of how they are feeling with the current tax policy, so that the next generation of tax reform will capture whatever impact has been felt by women. And the last thing I want to talk about is limited awareness by women in terms of tax policies and tax formalities. We know that the level of education of women is low. So this is a call for both civil society and government to increase education toward women, because sometimes the example that I like to usually give is when you have two phones that are from two lines and you have people that you want to call, you need to know what phone to use to call what line, If this is from this service provider and this service provider, it might cost you 1,000 shilling to call if you use this phone, but if you use the other phone, you pay less. It's exactly the same thing. If you engage in such economic activity, you'll be taxed 20%, but if you present your business this way, you'll be taxed 10%. If women don't have that basic knowledge, and they'll be just throwing themselves at activities, not knowing the policy behind, they'll be taxed more than men. Meanwhile, men know how to navigate and get to the bottom of the policy and get taxed the minimum possible. My last words will be to ask my colleagues from the Revenue Authority to ensure that government maintain a protection for women businesses through import taxes, etc., so that the sectors in which women are struggling can be protected against imports. Because what we see is that a lot of these informal sectors are being attacked by savage import from external sources. Also, reducing the rate of tax for women businesses, including mobile phones. Sometimes women, usually since they are informal, they rely on this type of communication, etc., etc. That will be it as far as I'm concerned. A call for us to think through issues that are raised in terms of data, issues in terms of impact, and issues in terms of targeting. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Maxim. Now, just bring in the conversation, bring you into it, Mr. Stephen Asimwe, from the Private Sector Foundation. Taking a look at what Dr. Maxim has mentioned, these policies, in particular policies, how do they stifle the development of women businesses within the country when it comes to taxation?
Thank you very much, and good evening, good morning, viewers. I'm representing my chairman of the Private Sector Foundation, Dr. Eli Karanga, who was not able to come, but he asked me to fill in for him. That's a very good question, but we have to look at the question in context before we can actually create what you'd think or would call an enabling answer. And I think Dr. Maxine has done a very good job on explaining some of the things I'm going to say. From the Private Sector Foundation, we represent 12 sectors of the economy. So broadly speaking, agriculture, manufacturing, ICT, trade, tourism, logistics, we're into financial services, professional services, etc., etc. And obviously, from our side of things, we do a lot of research and we do a lot of studies. And these studies have actually shown that as far as trade is concerned, 51% of the population is actually made up of women who are in the workforce. And that comes with a lot of implications. Uganda, if you were to look at a pyramid, you have the large, you have the small, micro, small, and medium enterprises. Women constitute almost 90% of that business pyramid. And these statistics come from the Bureau of Statistics. Uganda is #1 in most of sub-Saharan Africa of women-owned businesses, starting at about 38% of, compared to men. And then in terms of informal businesses, women constitute about 94% of these largely small and informal SME, and this is information we get from the business climate. But again, we've also seen that in terms of performance and adherence to ethics in business, women top that ladder. Again, this is information we've got from our statistical research. And this has been in the last 5 years, year in, year out. Now, to answer your question on how this impacts in the context of this, broadly speaking, picture that we painted, it's very, very important to know that, again, Uganda has one of the highest mortality rates of businesses. So by extension, women suffered the largest impact of closures of businesses. And one of the challenges within the causes of that mortality is taxation, and by extension, the impact falls on women. So that is something to look at. When you look at some of the assessments from our research, we've actually found that whereas the tax regime does not discriminate men and women, the women mostly suffer in terms of the high taxes or some of the impacts of how that tax is going to be run and managed. So sometimes over-taxation in the context of doing and running a business inadvertently affects women's growth and doing the business. So that is something we have noted. We've also noted that in the last 2 years, since the coming in of COVID-19, we've had 2 lockdowns and hundreds of businesses have been closing. The largest impact of that has hit the women, and inadvertently, because the businesses have been affected, the women can't pay taxes, and when the tax has been imposed, the women are the ones who have been suffering. So we are saying, should there be some affirmative action, some intervention by government in as far as looking at some of these businesses concerned? We think yes. I think Dr. Maxine did a good job on tax registration and the fact that education plays a very big role, or access to information. Again, the women are hampered in that context. We've also seen that the issue of engaging in tax identification numbers, paying FRIS, the ladies are slightly challenged in terms of accessing this information and how they do it, again, by factors that Dr. Maxine mentioned. The other thing we've seen is the fact that there's been a high, during the last budget, the cost of internet has increased because of the high taxes that have been imposed on data, on bandwidth, etc. And this 12% tax now on data has actually had a knock-on effect on how this business is done, and inadvertently how the payment of tax, and it has in many ways discouraged them, especially the younger ladies. But what are we doing at Private Sector Foundation? Now, the PSFU is an apex body of all the private sector players, and we do a lot of advocacy and lobbying in as far as doing business is concerned. We have within our over 250 associations, the Uganda Women Entrepreneurship League, UWIL, and in this we have tried as much as possible to train women, to empower them. We're doing a lot of skills development and seeing how else they can do business better. As a matter of fact, this afternoon, we're meeting the Minister of Finance to see and find ways of intervention in as far as women are concerned. And we're doing this on a daily basis. And now with this new lockdown and the new normal, we are trying to get as many women as possible so that we train them on how they can, 1, be empowered, 2, how we can support them, 3, how can we facilitate them, how do we skill them, how do we engage them at a broader level, giving them a voice to speak. And we do regular meetings with the Uganda Revenue Authority in order to show up on how we can do business better. But it's a growing discussion. It's something we are doing on a daily basis, and I think we'll come to a win-win situation. Thank you.
Just before we move on to the Uganda Revenue Authority, just with you, Mr. Stephen, when you mentioned that as the Private Sector Foundation, you have been doing a bit of advocacy and in talks with the Ministry of Finance, how far have these talks gotten? What results have we seen when it comes to women in business and taxation? Are there some positive steps that we have seen being taken?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Before the budget, we conducted a series of studies which took us to Western Uganda, Northern Uganda, Eastern Uganda, and the central part of the country. And in these meetings, we actually engaged women leaders, women in business, women in manufacturing, small-scale industrialists, SME groups of women, and we picked their views. And we actually did write a paper. We engaged people in Parliament, the Committee on the National Economy. We engaged policymakers at Ministry of Finance. We've been working very closely with UN Women and all these SDG groups, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things that we have seen, and I think Dr. Maxine mentioned it, is the access to information, especially by the policymakers. We have insisted, we have emphasized the fact that women control the biggest constituency. As I've just shown you, almost 90% of the micro, small and medium enterprises are owned and run by women. To that extent, it is necessary, and it's a protracted war, so to speak, that as much as possible, government needs to intervene in as far as empowering women is concerned. And one of the things that is the biggest challenge, the biggest bottleneck, one of them is the issue of taxation. And it's a growing discussion. It's about empowerment, it's about facilitation, it's about skills development, it's about formal businesses, but it's also about affirmative action. And we think that that affirmative action is something that we consistently have to engage in. Thank you.
Now, turning our eye to policy and legislative reforms undertaken by government, we did expect to have an official from the Ministry of Finance. Unfortunately, he has not been able to join us, but we do have one from the Uganda Revenue Authority. She is the Assistant Commissioner, Research, Planning and Development, Miss Millie Naluoga Isingoma. Now, Miss Millie, from what Dr. Maxime has mentioned, from what Mr. Stephen Esinge has also mentioned, it seems Uganda Revenue Authority is really on the spot here, and in particularly when it comes to knowledge, just simply information being passed on to women in business. So let's hear from you on that.
Thank you so much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen and fellow panelists. I'm glad to be here, and indeed on the spot. I hope Julius will come in to support me because we work very closely with him. We try to ensure nothing passes without his approval. However, that said, the women topic is a very interesting one, and unfortunately, I'm seated here as a woman. But I'll say what I have to say. Women in business, we must appreciate that it is difficult to have, like Dr. Maxine proposed, taxes reduced for women businesses, because women are the mothers of the nations. You'll find the son is running the business. From research we've carried out together with the CIATINI and other civil societies, you find women have confidence issues, so they will not come to register for tax, and a husband or a son will register. So if we look into having taxes for women, it will not really work. I vouch very much for access to information, like has been said, because at URA and together with the ministry and government, we also have recognized women are less educated, women have less access to information. Women are majority of single parents. They do a lot of unpaid care work. They are discriminated in terms of skills and things they are able to do. They are most likely in the informal sector. They don't have a lot of access to potential tax reliefs, because these tax reliefs require that you have to be literate, online registration, mobile phone, account holding, national ID. Some of these women may not really have, but these are some of the requirements that are out there, and these are some of the things that we are looking at. Statistics have been given about women in hotels, 78%. When you get to to URA, and here I would like to note that we do have gender-based statistics in Uganda Revenue Authority, because I'll tell you that of the individual taxpayers registered, 30% are women. It is similar with the statistics coming through. And also a third of these are the ones who are employees who are in our register. When you look at tax, the women who are participating are mainly in the retail, 41%, agriculture, 13%. Much as women are in agriculture, agriculture is contributing about 1% of formal taxes. So at this point, I want us to also look at the informal taxes. And from the researches that we've carried out together with various partners and civil society, you find that women are suffering more on the fees, market dues, and all that than the formal taxes. So we need to bring that discussion on table as well, and not only look at the government taxes. You find that in our register, women are in financial services, mobile money agents. Those have been participative in COVID. Those have not suffered, but those like in beauty and hairdressing and some other activities, those have been impacted by COVID indeed. And as government and URA, we tried to put measures in place that would really support women. And like I said, we cannot separate really women from men or from, so we try our best to look at what are those factors that impact women. If it's literacy, if it's access to information, then we work on those. And some of the measures we've put in place, I'll mention 1, 2, or 3. We talked about the registration process that is quite long. We've tried to simplify this process. It is now online. I know not so many women can get online, but we are still working to get it onto the phones so that you can register on phone. We have linked up with NIRA, so with time, you'll be able to just put in your name and all the other information populates. So that would make it easier for the women. But I would still vote for educating them and because some of these administrative measures, it's difficult to run them in an informal basis. We also have in place a number of initiatives we've put at the COVID time, things like voluntary disclosure. You come and declare, and we sign an MOU with you, and you pay periodically. So all this information is available, alternative dispute resolutions, and you know the topic has women in large, medium, and small businesses. So if you are in a large and medium business, you can look at voluntary disclosure, alternative dispute resolution, rather than go to court, have to pay for legal services and all that. We have also improved our feedback mechanism, and that is the Integrated Service Support Enhancement Program, where we have modernized our contact center. And our contact center is now focusing on expanding on the languages. We've said women are hardly educated. So we've started with English and Luganda. Luganda is a pilot, but we are bringing on many more languages from across Uganda. Since we rolled out this modernized contact center, we are receiving over 4,000 calls a week, and of those, over 500 calls are in Luganda. So women, I believe, are now starting to be able to access. And we're also going to work on the WhatsApp, because so many people are on WhatsApp, and all these will have different languages. We have a number of pamphlets, and I was telling Julia, some of us who can't talk so much, we use practical, and I hope you can see. These are all in Luganda, and also other languages. Luganda, because it's what is used here the most. If you go to other districts, you'll find, and some of them, omusolo gw'ebyenfuna afuna enyingiza mu by'entambula. Okay, you said entambula is men. Okuuma ebiwandiiko by'obusuubuzi. So all these we have to be able to support the women. And like I said, we won't say woman, but what is it? What is the factor that is stopping you from developing further? We have also done tax education campaigns. I've talked about this. We have conferences. We have CACASA. You've all heard of CACASA that comes on and tells you about what to pay. We are also taking literacy into schools. And schools definitely have a lot of girls and women. So we have tax literacy now has been inculcated into the school curriculum. So we believe that the taxpayer of tomorrow will be knowledgeable, whether a woman or a man, a person with disability, or whoever goes to school will be knowledgeable. We have serialized dramas. I hope some of you have watched these on TV, some in vernacular, in Uganda and English. We have these to try and reach out. And then for those who are going technology, we have e-learning on our website, and they can be able to access. And most recently, we came up with a mobile bus. I hope you have seen this, and this is also intended to reach out. We have taxpayers or women, I keep trying to stick to the word women who have to travel long distances to be able to access the services of tax and all. So we have brought the mobile buses, which will be reaching out to educate, to facilitate them in terms of filing, payment, and knowledge. So, doctor, you should be rest assured we are doing all we can to ensure that we reach out to the women. We have many more. I don't know if you can give me more time.
I will give you some more time,
Okay,
but
okay.
just to ask, as you continue with this, taking a look at what Mr. Stephen mentioned earlier, which is the highest mortality rate of businesses comes to women. So with all this knowledge that they might receive, at the end of the day, this woman who has to pay this tax, is she able to, and can she sustain this business?
Well, what I can say is the highest mortality of businesses is probably caused by women or people not having knowledge of tax as they are starting. And that is why I have said we've taken tax into the schools. We are taking tax knowledge everywhere, because if you start the business, I know everyone when they are starting business, they are thinking of the profit and all that. But if you don't have tax knowledge at that time, you'll not plan for tax. And yet tax you have to pay it as a citizen. So we are also making an effort to ensure that people know about tax from the start, so that you plan and know that as I'm costing, I have to add this amount. And some of our people are challenged by, for example, I was telling you about, I was telling Julius about the rentals. You find someone has built, has a loan, is getting rent, but is entitled to deduct that loan from the rent he's collecting, and has no knowledge of that. So if that accumulates over some time, by the time the taxman comes over 4, 5, 6 years, when you work it out, then it is a lot of money. But if you had the knowledge from the start, you would know that there are actual incentives. In fact, let me use this opportunity to talk about incentives. Doctor talked about incentives for large companies, but we have incentives. We have incentives for the small, we have incentives, because all those allowables in the tax law are incentives. You know that, for example, if you're earning about 27,000 a day, you don't pay any tax. You may not, people may not know that, but you don't pay. But from 27,000 to about 27,000 and above, then you start to pay 0.4%, but probably because our taxes are calculated in annual. When I tell you that if you're earning 10 million a year, then you pay 80,000 if you don't have records, or 0.4% if you have records. But that's basically 27,000 a day, and some people earn 5,000, and most of these small businesses. So it is about the knowledge that is leading to these. And when they talk about tax, I think we need to do more research. Is it formal tax or the fees, market fees? Because those, when cumulated, are also very high for these people. And every time people go to these small businesses for women, they say, abom solo. Abom solo. Now, when you say abom solo, you're looking at Millie of Uganda Revenue Authority. you don't look at the one from KCCA, at the one, So we need to be able to look at this together and see how our people. So when they say tax is the one leading to mortality of businesses, which tax? Is it the fees? Because in vernacular, it is all one name, Msolo. So we need to break it down for them and then also address that to be able to help our women.
Well, that definitely does show that we do have a knowledge gap when it comes to, on the ground, the women. What do they hear? What do they know? What have they received in what particular way of communication? We're going to be coming to you, Mr. Julius. Millie has mentioned your name quite a lot. But as we do come to you, Stephen seemed to have turned once incentives were brought on, once Millie mentioned incentives, and we'll be getting into that later on. But Julius, just for you to take over, take us through the gaps, the overviews, the challenges that we might have not had yet.
Thanks, and thanks, listeners. I think one of the most important issues we need to understand is that taxes have got different impacts on women and men because of the lifestyles, because of the roles we play in the society. Take, for example, if you have taxes on baby clothes, you know very well that who is likely to be spending more money on buying baby clothes. If we have taxes on water, on kerosene, we know who uses more water than the other on planet Earth, if in terms of women and in terms of men. So it is very important that if we are designing any tax policy, we put into consideration who is likely to pay this tax and how this tax is likely to impact on the consumption or on the livelihood of women and men. So in Uganda, I think there's some of the things we need to be looking at. We were, for example, looking at VAT on water and VAT on electricity. Whereas the argument is that, no, we need to put VAT on this water to have enough money so that we can actually increase water coverage, which would be a very good point. But at that particular moment, then you know that those who are actually using household water for consumption, mostly who are men, who are women, are likely actually to incur more expenses or use less water at the household level. So it's important that we get the discussion to the ground so that we can be able to understand how this kind of implication at not the level person. We've talked about incentives, and at the macro level, at the bigger picture, I mean, incentives, everybody will say, oh, incentives are okay because we are attracting international investors and the rest. And my sister here said, okay, yes, and of course we have incentives even for small and medium enterprises, which is okay. But at the same time is that you find out, again, those who are able to access these incentives, one, either you have good amounts of money in terms of capital, but second important is that your awareness, you are understanding that actually this incentive exists for me. I can actually take it up. That becomes a very big challenge. And as such, I think it's important that even when we have these benefits on these and these incentives, it is important that we educate the masses, whom actually we are trying to target. And I think Dr. said it very well, that the way actually you present your books also matters to URA. You present them in a way you find your tax rate is higher or lower. So if you don't know, you just present, and then you are given a rate which actually could even be higher. But for me, on tax incentives and benefits, I have one thing that really, at times also bothers me. On two occasions, one is, one of them is around we know that we don't pay tax on sanitary towels to increase usage. But we also know that they are still very expensive, even for a girl child who is senior in P7, senior 1 and 2 and 3, who are living in rural areas. So where is the benefit going? Maybe it is going to the factory that is manufacturing them. Could it be that probably this policy is counterproductive? Maybe we would have saved money and buy them freely and provide them to those who actually need it. So my base of the question is, sometimes we also need to look at these incentives and who actually is likely to benefit from this particular incentive, so that we can know that at least this incentive is reaching the people we are targeting. The other important element, of course, is on the taxes that are likely to be regressive. And I think my sister Miri talked about it. The question of user fees or these market dues. These actually can be, you can have triple taxes. If you go in the villages, you cut the banana plantation, along the way, you'll pay some tax. At the entrance of the market, you pay another tax. Even the space where you are trading from, you're also going to pay some tax. Inside that market, you pay tax for cleaning, you pay tax for collecting the garbage, you pay tax for using the toilet, you pay tax for providing the light. So actually, it becomes a very big proportion of the income you are generating from that small business that you are having. So these user fees, I think, for me, one of the things I'm looking out for is URA is mandated by the Constitution of Uganda and by law to collect all the taxes. Why can't they take over these collecting centers and also start collecting taxes? Because these measures actually are very counterproductive in terms of collecting these taxes, especially from the informal businesses. What are we looking out for in terms of taxes? I think for me that for taxes to benefit women more, we need to look at policies that are promoting production, rather than looking at when you start business and then you pay the processes. How, for example, can we support women who are at home and want to use online business? For example, if we are putting taxes on data, or we have taxes on ICT equipments, computers, tablets, and telephone, we know very well that if there is that woman who is at home taking care of the children, it is going to be a bit even more expensive for them to start online business, because data is going to be very expensive. And now this is the norm of the day. Even actually, if you look at the youth, is that most youth are running their businesses online. So it's very important that sometimes we need to think about these type of taxes to say whether actually it is going to promote production or it's being counterproductive. And I think the president even said it in one of his addresses. He said, Ugandans have no problem paying taxes. Just let them first make money. When they make money and go to the bars, then you will tax the beer. I think it's a good analogy. I think it's a good analogy that you let companies, you let individuals first make the money, and once they have enough money, then they start consuming, and then you target the consumption behavior of those particular individuals. So it's important. For example, if you look at payee, and you're like, probably if you can reduce on the threshold, maybe people will have a surplus income and contribute money. And really for me is that it is something, a strategy that helps even our revenue generation collection agency, URA, to look at those opportunities whereby if you reduce certain rates, maybe the company can make more money. Maybe small scale enterprises can make more money. And then we go for their consumptive behaviors. So I'm looking out for example, that one is in terms of key things that we could do is, let's look at specific products for specific individuals. I'm glad URA is really interested in gender segregated data, but I'm also looking forward to see whether there can be a special desk for URA to deal with gender and women issues, so that they can immediately deal with them. But also, the issue of ensuring everybody pays their fair share of tax. I think for me that's another element which is very important. Because if this woman has a store in the market and she's paying all the taxes, and the border boy can easily evade the taxes and move around, then also the morale to continue paying taxes actually lessens. So let's do that. And lastly for me is education. I think education is very important. When we are educated about our tax obligations and responsibilities, it becomes important that we pay the right taxes, that's the number one, but also we know that once we pay taxes, then we can also be able to get service delivered. I thank you.
Thank you, Julius. We're now going to be stepping out of Uganda and taking a look at what Uganda can actually learn from other countries on gender and taxation to support women-led businesses. And we'll start off with Caroline. She's here with me, the head of cooperation for the European Union delegation to Uganda.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for providing this opportunity for us to speak at this event today. I'm representing here the delegation of the European Union in Uganda, and for the European Union, gender equality is really one of our fundamental values. It's very important. It's a very ambitious target and objective that we have set for ourselves, and it is key for the sustainability of any public policy globally. On the topic today, specifically the link between gender equality, gender and tax policies, we think that active policies are really needed to promote the talent of women and to strengthen the participation of women in the labor market. And these are crucial preconditions for improving the economic independence of women and to close the pay gap and the pension gap. Now, socioeconomic inequalities between men and women bring a gender dimension into the impact of tax laws and tax policies. And while it's difficult to generalize about socioeconomic realities of men and women, there are still some common traits in the differences, economic differences between men and women that are relevant for taxation. For example, it can be safely stated that on average men earn more and are wealthier than women. Women are less likely to have capital income, which is closely related to property rights. Women are in general underrepresented as company owners or financial investors, and the way women establish entrepreneurship is also different from men. And women tend to be clustered in lower income groups and have higher poverty rates than men. Finally, paid and unpaid work is distributed rather unequally between men and women. So these socioeconomic inequalities between men and women are deeply rooted in legal cultures, economic structures in all countries basically over the world. Traditionally, men's labor is valued more publicly in the markets, while women's labor inside the private domain, the family, the household, does not receive the same economic recognition. And this has also shaped the gender segregation of men and women's work in the labor markets. And it contributes to assigning a lower value to women's work once they enter that market. So research has shown that it does matter which partner or spouse has access to and control the resources of the household. And if tax policies continue to be based on a belief that households pool and share their funds equally, then tax justice for women will be very difficult to achieve or impossible to achieve. So most EU member states, countries in the European Union have abolished tax regulations that implicitly differentiate between men and women. But still, tax systems and fiscal policy affect women and men differently because tax regulations interact with these socioeconomic realities that we have been talking about. So gender gaps persist. And eliminating tax-related disincentives to female employment and creating incentives for more equal intra-household distribution of paid and unpaid work are really very important objectives for taxation. Now, the obligation to ensure gender equality goes beyond the prohibition of indirect discrimination, as I said, in tax policies and tax laws. It aims at also promoting this real equality in the socioeconomic realities because both go hand in hand. So we need gender-based analysis of current and proposed legislative tax measures, tax policy recommendations which inform the stakeholders about the impact of taxation with regard to existing gender inequalities, so that it is possible to take appropriate measures to reduce these inequalities. The European Union promotes the compliance of its member states' tax systems with international human rights treaties. One of them is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which is an international treaty adopted in 1709 by the UN General Assembly, and which has been ratified actually by Uganda in 85. So the design of tax policies and tax systems should aim to contribute to promote employment, which provides for independent economic security throughout the life course for women, should contribute to equal distribution of paid and unpaid work between men and women, should contribute to reduce the gender gap in the income distribution and the old age security, and should finally contribute to reducing the gender gaps in the poverty and wealth distribution. Now, despite all the efforts the EU is pursuing in mainstreaming gender aspects, in having gender-sensitive budgeting strategies, etc., explicit consideration of gender aspects in taxation remains still exceptional. And this is a major hindrance for achieving gender equality. So I think with that, maybe I'll stop here. I'm happy to contribute further to the debate, and I thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Caroline. Definitely, we are, as of the conversation today, we're trying to see a way for taxation and women in business. Now, the hashtag is Gender and Taxation UG, wherever you're watching us from on NTV this morning. We're just about to get into the next bit of the conversation, but before we can, let's take a short break, and we'll be coming right back with more. We're still having a conversation about the high-level e-conference on gender, business, and taxation in Uganda. We were just taking a look at how we as Uganda could be able to borrow from the outside world, because Uganda does exist in an ecosystem of the globe where some of the challenges have been solved. Now, we've heard from Caroline, and we're going to be hearing from Dimitri, who is the head of office for the United Nations Capital Development Fund. He's joining us via Zoom, and if you're also a part of the conversation via Zoom, do know that we'll be taking your questions if you have any. If you're a woman, if perhaps you have a sister, an aunt, or someone, a lady in business, and you might have a particular question for any of our panelists, we'll be getting into your questions just in a bit. For now, we cross over to Dimitri. Where can Uganda learn from other countries on gender and taxation to support women in business?
Thank you so much for the invitation. I hope that you can hear me. I would like to recognize organizers, UN Women, as well as the Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group. From the socio-economic point of view. So in that respect, you cannot address the issue of taxation and make them more gender sensitive unless we are dealing with a broad range of different issues that impact on the equality of women. And from this perspective, any tax policy should be comprehensive, active, and progressive. It should be comprehensive in the sense that it should address various aspects of taxation and its impact on women in the overall context of promoting gender equality in the country. It should be active in the sense of instituting proactively measures and affirmative action that would help women, particularly in business, because the point of view that we are discussing today is mostly through women in business. And it should be progressive in the sense that it should follow basically 3 stages of gender-informed tax interventions. The first stage is addressing direct discrimination or explicit bias, which may include rules or legislation which treat men and women differently. We are seeing less and less of this around the world these days, and there are no such examples in Uganda, so we can say that Uganda has overcome stage 1. But here we come to stage 2, which is about removing indirect discrimination, that is implicit bias in tax systems. On their face, such regulations may appear to treat genders the same, but in reality, they create different impact on the genders in their application. And I think this is where we are. We heard just now a very good presentation from the Uganda Revenue Authority, and we heard about different measures that are applied to address the issue of small and medium enterprises, for example. But my impression is that whereas these measures are attempted to be presented as gender neutral, in fact, they're gender blind, because there is no consistent and systematic effort to address the implicit biases in tax system. And the next stage, which is stage 3, is to use tax system as a tool for greater gender equality, to support other processes of women's socio-economic empowerment, and then having gender transformative tax policies. In this sense, probably one good regional example is what happened in South Africa after 1994. South Africa established a commission that was headed by a very prominent economist, Katz, and that commission was appointed to review the tax system and make recommendations for improvement. It was a holistic approach, which I mentioned in the beginning, and the commission placed great emphasis on equality as a key principle, along with concerns about poverty and income inequality. So some of the changes that the Commission recommended and that have been instituted eliminate formal discrimination based on gender, including, for example, the introduction of a unified income tax rate structure for individuals, removal of the distinction between married and unmarried households, tax relief that is given to low and middle income taxpayers through adjustments to tax rates and income brackets. This said, of course, there are also some shortcomings in the South African tax system, and they're kind of similar to what we can observe in Uganda as well. Like, for example, there is still discrimination against households with only one income earner, which pay over 4 times as much income tax as households with 2 income earners. And gender bias in the way that tax deductions are allowed in the new system. The issue of a lack of gender segregated data has been mentioned, but it has also been mentioned that despite probably this lack of very granular data, we still have a good idea about how women are engaged in business and in economy in general. We need to look at this from the perspective to take a more closer look at how taxes impact the women businesses from the perspective of 3 major factors, which is capital, materials and inputs and labor. Very often, women's enterprises are disadvantaged when it comes to labor because men more often have access to free labor, which is mostly women's labor, particularly at the household level. Women are disadvantaged in that sense, and their production comes more expensively than that of men. In terms of materials, we are also observing more challenges for women-led enterprises. The survey of COVID-19 impact on Ugandan businesses that UNCDF completed last year clearly demonstrated that the cost of inputs has increased by 30%. And probably we still don't have data for the latest lockdown, but it is quite likely that the impact has been similar. Lastly, the access to finance. It's no secret that usually financiers consider women-led enterprises as more risky than those headed by men, and therefore their access and the cost of finance that they enjoy is higher. Here, I would like to mention a facility that UNCDF is running together with our partners, PSFU, and I'm very happy to see PSFU participating in this discussion, as well as with the Uganda Development Bank, and also supported by the European Union. So I would like to appreciate Caroline's presence here and her support to this facility. The facility takes an explicitly proactive position when it comes to women-led businesses or businesses that create substantive benefits for women. And I believe that this is the way we should go in general, because the priority within the facility is given to the businesses that are either women-led, have significant women ownership, or employ not less than 30% of women. In reality, we have achieved even a higher benchmark. On average, the women make up 50 to 60% of the employees and beneficiaries in the businesses that we support through the START facility. That is the name of the facility. We are also trying to de-risk those facilities by investing more in terms of development and technical assistance to women promoters and women project developers. Again, it's not a secret, and it has been mentioned here, that often women's access to expertise, to networking is limited. And that limitation is nested in socioeconomic traditions and norms, not necessarily just in the taxation system. But to be able to address that challenge, you would need to invest additionally in raising the capacity and the business acumen, if you wish, of women-owned enterprises. So this leads me to the question of taken a proactive position in the tax, with the tax policy. This is what I think is missing. We have seen several examples worldwide where affirmative action has been applied to either direct taxes, such as the personal income tax, or indirect taxes, the VAT in particular, to support women enterprises. We can also think about some tax holidays for women enterprises or enterprises that create significant benefits and engage women in economic activities. Again, there are several examples in the region and in the world where such policies do exist. So together with our partners, UNCDF welcomes very much this conversation about taxation and gender, and we are committed to working with our partners to help address the inequalities that exist not only in tax systems, but also generally speaking in the business support ecosystem. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dimitri. Now, if you are on Zoom and you might have some questions, you can also send in your questions. One of them came in from Enoch Twinobodio, and this goes to URA Millie. It's an interesting discussion by URA. There is no gender-responsive tax regime. The conventional tax education and other initiatives are not directly targeted, not women targeted, but groups that are most dominant with women. Do we have any monitoring of beneficiaries by gender, and keen to have more information therein? This is to you, Millie. Yes, you can go ahead and answer.
Thank you for that question. Like I said, it's difficult to have a regime that is gender, just for the gender. We are looking at the factors that impact the women. The tax education strategy and services we have in place are also looking at that. But from the discussion we've had, and indeed I was noting down here that as Uganda Revenue Authority and together with government, and I'm sure together with civil society, we need to purpose and come up with a tax education strategy that is purposed and focused to women. Because even from the presentation that was being given, he noted that that women businesses suffer a lot in terms of labor, that the labor costs are high. But labor costs are an allowable expense when you're going to pay tax. So it is all about lack of information. If those costs are high, if women have to pay for labor and men are not paying for labor, then that is deducted and you don't have to pay, because tax is from the net profit you get at the end of the day. So for sure we are going to purpose. This has been a very good debate, and see that we come up with education that is purpose for women, and even have women. We have been doing this, and if you want more information, I can give information where we purpose to get women, but I think it needs to be bigger than just URA. How do we all get together? And like he said, affirmative action. But in the area of education, for me, I would not promote really incentives for women or tax incentives. So we are not going to be able to tell the difference. Maybe in more developed economies, they can clearly differentiate that this is a woman business, or this is, yes, we can look at businesses that support women activities, fine. But as we look at the way we manage our information and data in developed economies like Uganda, you'll find that if we get an incentive for women in particular, no man will own a business. You know how our families work. All businesses will be now registered under women's names and those at home. So let's purpose to do the education as our economy grows, and maybe at a certain time we will be able to consider reducing tax specifically for women businesses.
All right, now Dr. Maxime, we'll hear from you, and then we'll hear from Stephen and Julius as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. I want to thank the colleagues that spoke after me, Caroline and Dimitri inclusive, as well as my PSFU colleague here. We are now at the heart of the conversation. Let me give you an example that Dimitri took. We are in South Africa, a country that's been devastated by apartheid for several years, and then you have a democratically elected government that says, I want to promote black business. The intrication of black businesses in Uganda, in South Africa, is more complex than the complexity of women businesses in Uganda. So if they have been able to sort out black businesses and support black businesses with aggressive tax reform, surely we can do it for women. Because what women have been suffering in Uganda is similar to what black businesses have been suffering in South Africa under apartheid. And they succeeded to a certain degree. Okay? So we have seen in South Africa policies that force corporates to have a minimum of 30% of black people in their boards. For instance, we have had a lot of interesting things that we can learn from such thing. Now, the other thing is, if we define something that describes the vulnerability of women, and some men present those type of vulnerability, so be it. Let them enjoy the vulnerability. If they are, people jokingly call me here Mr. Madam. If I'm chief of UN Women and I'm a man, let people treat me like a woman. It's fine. So when we are talking about fairness, I agree with the Revenue Authority that we are not calling women by family name. We are calling them by vulnerability. And if there is a man that is under that kind of vulnerability, it's okay. So in terms of fairness, I think it's important to take that into account. Someone can pay 20,000 Ugandan shilling and pay more taxes than someone who pays 10 million, because those 20,000 represent maybe 90% of their revenue. So that is something that we need to capture. I will end with one other example, which explains the bridge between the economic sector and the household. There was a country where government has decided to support household economy by reducing tax on electricity consumption. So these automatic meters, they reduce the tax in the evening. So they say when the household consume electricity in the evening, they pay less tax, so it will help. What happened is that businesses started producing in the evening. So the shoemakers, the industry started producing in the evening to enjoy the benefits of that tax. What do? They recruit people who can work in the evening, which are men. So then you have less women employed in the country as a result of a well-intended policy. Meanwhile, in the household, what was going on? The man is responsible for paying electricity in the house. So the budget of the man goes down because he pays less electricity. So whether outside or inside, men benefited from that policy. And government did not intend that before. So that's why we say we need to go deeper in terms of looking at the analysis of the impact of the tax on differentiated between men and women, and also see how we can. Now, last point is the civil servants in the tax office. I don't know specifically about Uganda. I just came back from Benin, where government has decided that for 2021, whoever comes to pay the tax for previous years would not have penalty as long as they pay by December 21st and as long as they come spontaneously themselves. But what the civil servant at the tax office did was to send a letter to all of the taxpayers January 1st to say, we are asking you to come and pay your tax. So when people come, they say, oh no, you cannot enjoy the policy because they say you should come spontaneously. Well, you are not coming spontaneously because we just sent you a letter. Because these civil servants have a bonus on how much they collect on previous year's taxes. So the government policies is coming directly in conflict with the benefits of civils. Those are small, small things, but when women don't know the policy and when women are dealing, that's why I'm very happy that you are digitalizing, so the contact between the taxpayer and the thing that impact on the vulnerable women will be reduced. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Maxime. Now to you, Stephen, your response to Dimitri's remarks. What Uganda can learn, in particular the private sector, where can you pick up from what he has said?
Thank you very much for that question. Just listening in from my colleagues and what I had shared earlier. In 1987, thereabouts, I think government, and particularly the president, gave an affirmative action intervention for 1.5 points for every A-level girl. And that inadvertently took many women to the university. At that time, we had only one university, Makerere University. But the impact of that intervention is still being felt right now. Because that 1.5 gave women access to good education from an earlier biased and almost lopsided educational system. In fact, from that intervention alone, many institutions like the UN and the African Union have borrowed a leaf. And clearly, one small policy intervention has huge multiplier exponential effect on the outcome of everything. Because an educated woman is an educated mother, is an educated investor. I speak this because my mother and my wife have had a huge impact because of access to information and access to education and having empowerment. So to the extent that I have been listening in, one of the things that has been coming out consistently is the fact, and it came particularly from my sister from Uganda Revenue Authority, that a lot of these policy benefits and incentives exist, but very few women have access to that information, and inadvertently it affects and impacts on their failure or inability to enjoy some of the benefits. So my take home and my advice would be, one, the need for us in the private sector to really make it almost a mandate to ensure that our gender inclusiveness focuses a lot on empowering the ladies, information, on visibility, on the knowledge base. Within private sector foundation, we have very good instruments and very good projects and programs. One of them is the Skills Development Fund. And in that Skills Development Fund, the SDF, that has been part of our engagement. We have something called the Young Africa Works under the MasterCard Foundation, the lead farm structure. We intend, and our vision is to ensure that a lot of our young, and especially women, have access to decent jobs. And our target is 3 million young people. Under the lead farm structure, we, among other things, ensure that our people are empowered, especially the girls, the girl child. Now, recently we signed with the UNDP. We had we signed partnership with UNDP on the Gender Equality Seal program. And in that program, we have engaged 44 companies to sign up. And one of the things that is involved, is embedded in that initiative, is promoting equity of employers within the companies, especially women-owned business. So it's a very comprehensive plan. But typically, I would like to agree with Dr. Maxine in that, can we identify those catalysts, and then within the policy frameworks, we make that intervention. I'll give you an example very quickly. The tourism sector employs more women than men. In fact, 1 out of 11 people globally in the tourism sector is 1 out of 11 different sectors is from tourism. But the majority of that are women. In Uganda, right now, the tourism sector has almost 14 taxes and levies. So I don't know who said it there, that there is a difference between a tax and a levy. So if I'm taking my bananas to the market and someone removes some dues, it doesn't go to URA, it goes to the local government. Now in tourism, they have 14 levies. They have a tax for the lift, they have a tax for noise, they have NEMA tax, not URA, NEMA. They have something to do with environment, I don't know what, there are 14. That puts a huge, huge impact. In fact, in one of the studies we've done, part of the challenges why many businesses are not in the formal sector is because of these overarching taxes and dues and levies, whatever I want to call them. Now, I just said earlier that if you took a pyramid, the micro, small, and medium enterprises, the majority are owned and run by women. Now, to the extent that you have so many taxes and levies and dues and fees, I don't know how else you're going to describe, that are impacting on the business. One, it hurts the business. Two, it discourages the businesswoman. Three, and let's not look at gender or women in silos, it is impacting on families. You know, an attack on one is an attack on us. So anything that hurts my wife and my daughter affects me. So we must take interest in all of this. And again, we are going for a meeting this afternoon with the Ministry of Finance, and we are discussing this particular issue. And I'll take the message to them that I've been in a conference where we've been discussing what are those things that are hurting tax. And as a policy analyst, I'll carry the message to them. And I'm asking that those who are viewing us should take a keen interest in discussing some of these policy initiatives. Thank you.
And also following up on how that conversation will go.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks.
We'll move on to you, Julius. What are your takes from today's conversation?
Yes, again, thanks for the discussions, really. I mean, at CSBAG, we pride ourselves in starting difficult subjects. When everybody is running away from them, for us, we say, no, let's start the topic and see where it is going to take us. And I'm glad that we are getting somewhere. And I think myself and maybe sitting on the DRMS committee that looks at domestic resource mobilization, I think the next meeting, should be one of the things, and I'm sure Miri will support me when I raise these issues and some of the concrete things. But two major things, I think, answers that some of the questions that we are anchoring on is on how tax policies can benefit men and women equitably. And I think we have deliberated on that, ensuring that, first of all, is that if you have a policy on incentives, let it not backfire. You want to ensure that you have incentives, what I mentioned on sanitary tower, but probably it is the company that is producing, not actually the actual users. So the issue of interrogating further the question before we provide these incentives, I think is very important. So that's the very key and very important. I think for us as CSBAG and our colleagues, it's an item that we need to take home and see how to help URA and the government, that as you are planning these incentives, these are the key factors that are actually contributing to less utilization or overutilization of an activity. The second important question, I think, for me, which again it has also been debated on, is how can we make women businesses thrive? I think for me to understand that the mortality rate of women businesses is so high because of the number of reasons, including, again, these numerous taxes, also takes us back to the issue of how can we then deal with it. And I think for me is we have understood here that I think tax education is very important for any individual, women, men, to understand their tax obligations. And I'm glad that recently we have seen you are really, going out really to educate the masses, and also a commitment that actually they will be able to deliberately actually trying to look for women to ensure that they're educated and they understand their tax obligations and commitments. But I think one of the things which Dimitri talked about was the issue of capital, because we're also talking about businesses. I know when I talk to her and I say, please let's cut taxes, Mire will grow goose pimples because she knows that she has the whole mandate of raising trillions of Ugandan shillings for service delivery. But then we need to help them and say, okay, fine, we have these benefits if you do these particular cuts. If, for example, we talk about how can we harmonize local government taxes with the national taxes, I don't think it is the spirit of government that you have all these triple tax rates on one business. Maybe it's a question of coordinating to ensure that you can pay one rate. And even me, I have always asked myself, you are importing one thing and you are being told VAT on this is this amount. Import duty is this amount. Excise duty is this amount. Environmental levy, I'm like, why don't you tell me how much it is and I pay, and then you deal with yourself with the different types of taxes? So already that is confusing, but also it makes you understand. You begin to ask yourself, why all these particular taxes? So coordination, I think, for me, between local government and the National Revenue Authority can help us really to harmonize some of these taxes so they are not very, very abusive. I thank you.
Caroline, to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the interesting discussions. Maybe many things have already been said, but maybe one thing I wanted to stress maybe in my conclusion is indeed the aspect of access to information, education, awareness for women. I think it's a very important point. I have to thank my colleague Dimitri from UNCDF to mention indeed the program that we are funding and that is implemented by UNCDF through also the Ugandan Development Bank, the START facility together with PS4U, because PSFU, because under the Sustainable Business for Uganda platform, which is co-chaired actually by the Private Sector Foundation Uganda and the European Union here in Uganda, we have identified access to finance as an important bottleneck for business here in Uganda in general, but specifically also for women, and that's why we have created this facility. We have a number of other facilities on access to finance, and all of them have a specific focus on promoting access of women to entrepreneurship, and all these facilities go together with kind of business development services, advisory services, as Dimitri was mentioning, technical assistance support, to make sure that those that access finance and that can benefit from these facilities also get the correct guidance and advice on how to take their business forward. And this includes information on tax obligations, because it's indeed important, and I fully agree with the point of view, Ray. It's a civic duty. So it's important that women that access entrepreneurship, that access business, have this information. So I think this is one of the important points that I would like to underline from the discussion today. So thank you again.
And to Millie.
Thank you so much. This has been quite interesting. I must share that at URA we are undergoing reform, and our vision is a transformational revenue service for Uganda's economic independence. That says so much. Everyone participating, we are not just looking at collecting tax out of people, but we are looking at together growing our country. So we are listening, we are being driven by the core values of professionalism, integrity. Integrity is very key, and all these, like Doctor shared, some of the things done by public servants are also about not having a culture of integrity and not being patriotic. Our other value is patriotism, love for your country, love for your people. So if government has given an incentive, why are you quick to disadvantage your fellow citizens? So we are looking at all this, and we invite you to participate in this with us. One of my other takeaways is more joint policy research and discussions. And from the very start, the financial year has just started. We can't do this as just URA alone or Ministry of Finance alone. I know so much has been said about the 12% tax on data. Before this came through, some participation took place. A lot could be done better, but it was a consultative process. And this 12% is not only on data, it was intended to harmonize. It was intended to harmonize the excise duty rates on airtime, value-added services, internet, removal of OTT. So when we look at it as just data, it becomes a challenge. So it's also too soon to predict that it won't work. So I invite us, let's work together, private sector, civil society, ask the administration, because at the end of the day, you, the implementer, the me, is the one who is looked at. No one will look at all those discussions. We've been in discussions with Julius, with private sector. They heard of this 12% before it came through. So when it comes through, they say, you are a why is this? So let's work on all this together. Mistakes will be made, but the most important is what happens after that. OTT came on board. When we did analysis together and realized it's even people are using VPN and it's not impactful. So like Julia shared, we need to analyze policies before, but I also say we need to analyze policies after. And all this we need to do together so that we are able to get. And then also, like Julia shared, another take home is we also need to find other alternatives. Like you said, I grow goods pimples, because always many discussions talk about give people incentives, reduce taxes here, but we have a country to run, and we have to feed people, we have to treat people. So where is that other money going to come from? So let's work together and see what are the other revenue sources. I'll say that we are glad and thankful to government that we are now on automatic exchange of information. That from that OECD Global Forum, that will enable us to get automatic access to information and reduce revenue hemorrhage and probably increase the revenue take. And then when we get such in place, then we can look at what Dimitri shared of purposing to remove indirect discrimination. But when all you have is just a meager 12 to 13% of GDP of your revenue, it becomes difficult for you to balance and also look at the vulnerable. So if we can work together and increase to at least 20% of GDP, trust me, the vulnerable will be cared for. So I invite all of you, and at URA we have elevated our research and innovation function. So this function is going to be looking at policy research. So Julius, you're welcome, private sector. Let's work together. Let's work with the EPRC and all these and have these fully analyzed, and so that we can inform. So tunalengo moja. Thank you. Thank you so
very much, Millie. Now, there's a conversation that's going on Zoom, and perhaps Julius will be the best to clarify on this. There's a particular gentleman, it's between Enoch and Arthur is clarifying and telling Enoch, this is where you go wrong. We cannot try to help women by keeping the men out of the package. It is self-defeating. So as we had mentioned earlier, it's interesting that we're having these conversations now, and they're timely, but there are men who feel that you are leaving them behind, they're not part of the package, and it is self-defeating.
And I think Dr. Maxine mentioned that if you're a man and you are vulnerable like the women we are talking about, please, you should also benefit from what we are talking about. Because it's just not about woman as a woman, but we are talking about defining woman at the level of vulnerability, how vulnerable they are. In fact, maybe we should even have mentioned that we have people with disabilities, we have youth, who are highly unemployed. So it's about the vulnerability that we are talking about. So to my gentlemen out there is that it's about the vulnerability we're talking about, and that women are more likely to be vulnerable than men because of circumstances and the society that we live in. And I think that's one of answering that question.
As we educate the women, how do we bring in the men? where do we go? Where do we bring them into the fold? Because in one way or another, sometimes these men have, as Stephen had mentioned, there's a mother, there's a sister, there's someone they could take this information to. How do we bring them into the conversation?
I think the conversation is, from my personal experience for me, is that is the way we grow up. That patriarchy starts within our household, where you find that the boy is designated to do certain tasks and the girl is designated to do certain tasks, not put into consideration your ability to deliver. So that leaves the household, goes to the society, and even to where we work, or even our workplaces. And that's why sometimes you find that when it comes even to these promotions, people tend to say, oh, he's a man, he can take over, or this is a woman, cannot take over. So the way we are brought up, I think, is quite very important. And government program on social empowerment is quite very important, to educate the public that it's just not because you're a man or woman, but everybody should be treated according to their ability to deliver. And we have seen it. Look at Miri here. I mean, she's an assistant commissioner in URA. Probably 10 years ago, 20 years ago, nobody would think that you can have a woman at such a kind of position. So it's quite very important that we educate our society that women and men, girls and boys have the same, can be able to deliver on anything depending on their ability to do that. Thank you.
And the last question, due to time, Enoch had asked that all speakers respond to this question, but we have a very short time window. So I'm going to just ask Dr. Maxime to respond to this. There's a mention of affirmative action and need for gender-responsive taxation measures. What are the keys from each, from your particular pathway? What would you think the key would be?
Yeah, thank you very much. As I said, we need data to make sure that we are targeting right. Second, we need research in order to show that, as you already said earlier, that we see the impact of it, because the tax policy has to be a dynamic process. Huh? So where you trial, and you cannot see an impact in 5 years. It has to, see in the long term. The other thing is how to match with education. That's why they call it temporary measure. And if an affirmative action can never be a permanent measure. It's a temporary measure, but if you put in place a temporary measure without accompanying that measure with capacity to bring the beneficiary of the measure up to speed with the other people, then it will not be sustainable. So it's like import substitution. When you put in place tax to protect local producers, those tax or tariff can never be permanent because of WTO rules, etc., etc. You have to remove them at a certain point. So if you give yourself 10 years, what you do within the 10 years, so that by 10 years' time, your producers will be strong already for you to remove these barriers, it should be applied for women as well, where we say we put in place tax incentive for women. This incentive will be in place for 20 years, but in 20 years' time, this is what we as government want to do to support these people so that by 10 or 20 years' time, they will not need that incentive anymore because they will be at the same level as men in business. So that's what I think we have to do. But most of the time, we put in place the incentive, we don't put in place the accompaniment measures, and 10 years down the line, they are still vulnerable. Okay. Thank you.
Right. I saw Miss Millie noting down as well, so I'll let her speak on the question and then we'll wrap it up. She seemed to have something to respond to Enoch.
Thank you. I was in total agreement with Doctor, and I've always had a challenge with putting tax incentives, but not working on those who are vulnerable. And that happened, I think, in textiles. Textiles, you put a high tax for importing, but you've not worked on the factories. And then the people are not having clothes, the small girls who are using sewing machines are not having materials, or the materials they're importing are very, very expensive, so it becomes counterproductive. So he's very, very right that all these have to be discussed and implemented in unison. Once you're bringing, in fact, tax incentive is at the end point. You have to first look at what is your purpose. If the purpose is to grow the industry, what are the activities you have to do? And then that tax incentive is to help you leverage that period until you're able. So I totally agree. And for the women, I also agree that we are looking at the vulnerability, because we have the youth, we have the PWDs, we have the women, we have the husbands, wives, sons. So if we look at those factors of the vulnerability and address those ones, then we will be able to address the issue. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Stephen, to you as well. Could I read the question again, or had you noted it?
Well, I think that areas of emphasis, I don't want to repeat what they have said, but for us at Private Sector Foundation, we have analyzed and we have scanned the landscape. And we feel very, very strongly that, like I said, most of the businesses, micro, small, and medium enterprises, are largely either women-owned or women-operated. And we feel that the inclusiveness, especially on financial support, access to credit, is still, skewed against them. And by them, I mean even the vulnerable. If we had a discussion on disability, you'll be shocked that a lot of the people with disabilities are dying at a very early age, whether women or men, because the environment does not favor them at all. If you came, apart from a few buildings, there are very few buildings and real estate that have catered for people with disabilities, and they are completely being shut out from business, from education, from et cetera, et cetera. So for us as PSFU, we have seen this, and I'm glad that my sister has mentioned the fact that we need to look at the ecosystem. What are those enablers? And again, research has shown that a lot of the women are not having access to finance, and yet they are very good performers when it comes to payback. So if we can plug those loopholes, I don't think the revenue people or whoever it is that is going to have to access this. We're looking at things that are discouraging people from doing business. And to the extent that we can support and create an inclusive and enabling environment, the tax issue is really the end result. So empowerment, support, inclusiveness, and some of these other catalysts like affirmative action will just really fast track some of this performance. Thanks.
Well, Dimitri would also like to join the conversation. He would like to share his comments. We're going to just be going to Dimitri now.
Our viewers cannot see the chat box with a very interesting discussion going on here about the appropriateness of affirmative action for women. So allow me to comment on this. We've heard, obviously, it is not an uncontroversial issue, and we've heard during this discussion concerns that men may use women as just a front for their businesses, that there may be businesses pretending doing good for women, and so on and so forth. I believe we should not be ashamed or we should not be shy of affirmative action. And the reason for that is that women as a social group, and in business in particular, are disadvantaged. If we want to address that disadvantage, we need to create more favorable conditions for them. And I'm a believer in the state's proactive position and tilting the playing field in the favor of women or any other disadvantaged groups as necessary. When I was talking about the START facility, I mentioned that the facility gave the priority to women-led enterprises or enterprises that create significant benefits for women. and they may be headed by men. So in that sense, you may say that the approach is trying to do. We are trying to promote more active engagement of women in economic activities and in production. Together with our partners, UNDP and UN Women, we developed an index, a Women's Economic Empowerment WEE index, that measures several dimensions of how women benefit in the context of a specific project. There are economic, social, and other aspects that are measured and then that help us understand whether a particular business proposal meets the requirements or not. We have kind of something similar in the public sector, where, as you know, any public budget at the local level needs to be certified, or at the ministry level needs to be certified in terms of its compliance with gender equality provisions. But we should also use it to private sector projects, particularly those which we, as the public sector, as the development community, support by providing concessional finance or some other advantages. So this proactive position should be made very clear, and we should identify the specific actions that can be applied to support women. Thank you.
Thank you, Dimitri. Definitely a few of them have been highlighted here this morning and afternoon. It's exactly 12 p.m. Now, here on NTV, we're having the high-level e-conference on gender, business, and taxation in Uganda, and the conversation was also going on Zoom and will be continuing till 1 p.m. But from us to you, we are telling you here at NTV that the theme was all about stimulating economic growth through gender-sensitive tax policy, and one thing that we have highlighted is that we need to start with just knowledge, educating the women about what is available for them, and also having all stakeholders come on board. So to all our panelists, thank you so much for taking the time. We know that we'll be following up with Stephen to see how the conversation goes with the Ministry of Finance. Julius, I think, will be helping with that as well. But to each and every woman, I hope you have been able to pick something for your business and how you can go forward. Have a good afternoon.